All right, I believe we're live, and you're not supposed to see that yet. Hello, and welcome to Freeplay 2019's online sessions. Freeplay is Australia's largest and longest running independent games festival. The festival is currently running all week in Melbourne, Australia, and the tickets for this weekend's conference are still available, and you can find them at freeplay.net.au. If you'd like to join the conversation, our hashtag is freeplay19. All right. Hi, I'm Jennifer. Thank you for coming. Um, we had some technical difficulties coming up. So unfortunately, my wonderful setup that I showed on Twitter didn't work out. So we'll just have a beautiful slide to look at and my voice to listen to instead. So the slide that you just saw, which you were not supposed to see, is this one. I'm Jennifer Reuter, and I'm a visual storyteller, which means that I like to illustrate, I like to draw comics and storyboards, I like to animate, and occasionally make narrative games. And I'm currently also dealing with a business class where my business plan is due next week. Wish me luck. And yeah, so welcome to my talk all about self-inserts. Now, for those of you who are in the chat, I would highly encourage you. You're very welcome to leave commentary and to respond to anything. Because I can't hear you laugh, and I most certainly can't hear you groan with embarrassment. So do whatever what's it called, keyboard spamming you feel is necessary. So first of all, what I should explain, of course, is what are self-inserts. Are you ready for some self-inserts? Are you ready for them? Are you ready for some really wonderfully old tacky drawings? Yes, you are. No, you're not. It doesn't matter. Here we go. So, what self-inserts basically are the author inserting themselves into a fictional context. And this, yeah, so that's what self-inserts are. The artist interpreting themselves into a story that might already exist or that they have created themselves. The other word that can be used for self-inserts too are personas. And those personas usually refer to fandoms. So, for example, like my beautiful examples on screen, a troll persona from Homestuck, troll persona. If you've played Mass Effect, might be familiar that the main character, Shepard, is actually the player inserting themselves into the game. And I don't even think they're referred to as shepsonas, but I might as well use that here. And the one on the right is a gemsona from the cartoon Steven Universe, except I went really abstract with the concept because I like that stuff. So those can be called personas. And another version of a persona is, again, an artist's self-interpretation, but more symbolic and kind of like a brand. So in my case, this used to be my dragon persona. The image on the left is like something from 2007. And the one on the right is something from 2012. So I actually had this for a pretty long time. And it's cute, it's adorable. But I like my current one way, way better. Because I think it represents my creativity so much more. But for the purposes of this talk, I would like to refer to all of these different versions of self-representation as self-inserts. And you'll see why I want to make that distinction later. So that's self-inserts as a general description of what people might might the first thing that comes to mind when you think of self-inserts. But what I want to go into is really the features that make self-inserts be a self-expressive format. Like, what does a self-insert really need to function like one? And I also want to go into, what are some of the criticisms that people have towards self-inserts that kind of misconstrue that purpose, those features. So the very first one, the pink cloud on the left, is fictional daydreaming. And this sounds pretty obvious, but self-inserts really are a way to imagine yourself being somebody else somewhere else, but not quite somebody else. You're still yourself, just, better and makes no mistakes and is loved by everybody and, everything that you would like to be. And that gets me to my very first case of people who criticize self-inserts. And that is that a self-insert is sorry, let me think a little bit. That self-inserts are really bad for storytelling purposes because they're so exaggerated. They don't have to be. There have been many stories where self-inserts are more realistically portrayed, but most of the time they tend to be the hero, the super protagonist, the character that gets thrown into this world and beats everybody and does everything right. And the problem with arguing whether or not it's a good storytelling, if it has storytelling merit, is that it's very subjective. every Susan, Larry, and Bob has a different idea of what's good storytelling, and some people really like ridiculous stories that are where the main character is way too powerful or way too amazing. Two animes that I can think of I say animes because that's just the first thing that popped into my head when I was doing this research is One Punch Man, which I haven't seen myself, but I do know the rough premise is about this guy who sometimes appears totally ordinary with this weird cape, and then the next scene is really dramatic and amazing and super powerful. And Overlord is also a trope reversal of putting this main character into a fantasy world as a player character in a role-playing game, and he can do anything, and it's kind of making fun of it but also takes it seriously. So to say that self-inserts are poor storytelling is not really much of an argument. What I'm more interested in is, well, if people are so disturbed by a self-insert being too powerful and too amazing, you know Mm, I lost my train of thought. If people are so perturbed by that, why? Why do they get so upset about it? There's a few reasons just from a fictional side of things why this happens. First of all, imagine you're walking down the street and you come to the bus stop where you usually catch your bus. And just as you enter the overhang where the seating is, where you wait for the bus, and just as you walk in, there are two people who share with each other something really important to each other. And then they hug, or they start crying together, or they kiss. And you, as the bystander, you feel kind of like a third wheel. You just walked in on something that is really personal, and you lack the context why these people are having this conversation right in this moment. And I think that aptly describes how people respond and feel awkward when they see self-inserts, at least the ones that people publish online. Self-inserts in fiction, based off franchises, therefore fan fiction, or even a self-insert in an original story where the author kind of decides, look, I'm going to make myself cool in my own story. And it simply is the fact that self-inserts are a exaggeration of yourself to find a way to find self-confidence. Because you, as the artist, as the author, you view the world that you created or the world that you are setting yourself into with really high respect. We tend to put characters on a high pedestal. So if the author then puts themselves on the same level as they are, maybe even higher, there's something really genuinely fun about it, but also empowering. And when somebody else walks in on this, you know, self, you know, this special moment, they don't see that. Instead, what they see, because they might also have high respect for the original content, if it's fan fiction, then instead of seeing this person respecting the characters so much they want to be part of the crew, what they see instead is this person is disrespecting all the characters by making them all look worse, right? So there's this sense of betrayal, this sense of, how dare you make yourself look better than these characters who are already so high in esteem to me? The third thing, or second thing, because I've kind of combined a few things together by now, is something that I like to call an uncanny valley of context and character expectations. Because when you read a story or watch a film, what we do is we have this the suspension of disbelief, which means that we are willing to pretend, which is really weird for humans, that the story we're watching or reading or playing isn't real, but we believe that it's real while we're interacting with it. So when a person puts in a character who obviously breaks all of the rules, all of the context, the established reality, you get this uncanny valley where the expectations of that reality are broken. And there's this uncertainty. Is this character a parody, or is it serious? Are they trying to make fun of it? Are they trying to be, vulnerable? I don't get it. So a lot of people are not comfortable with this sort of this they're not comfortable with being uncomfortable, basically. So they respond quite personally to what happened. So, all right, I've given you some theory. Now it's back to self-inserts again. You ready? You ready for the next batch? Here we go. Gotta go fast. So I find it a little bit funny that I am presenting this subject about self-inserts because I was actually quite a latecomer to it. I grew up with this, what should I call it? This mentality that I should try to be humble as much as possible. That and humbleness, I know now, means more just understanding that, you don't exist in a void. There are other people around you. Appreciate that when you do succeed in things, that the world around you influences you. People help you, inspire you. It's just, I find that important even today. But back then, what I thought it meant was that I should never, ever show my pride or my ego related to features I like about myself, skills that I have. I I I felt like I shouldn't show those things. And I felt like this even before I entered the internet and people were, mocking self-inserts as a display of ego and, breaking, poor writing, breaking the context of everything. So what I did instead, even though I had self-inserts in my imagination, I didn't put them to paper. What I did instead is I turned my self-inserts into characters. So the character on the left, which is from 2006, I was like 11, 12 years old maybe. She was, I don't really remember who she was, but I do remember she was, even she looks like it. She looks like somebody who's quite serious, but somebody who has freedom of movement, who is athletic, who probably knows a little bit more than the other characters do, or is at least wise. And they're all things that I wanted to embody, but I was too embarrassed to put it on, to make it be me. The drawing on the right is something I did maybe 2009, a couple years later, which is more of a self-insert. I found a Sonic character maker, and I decided, well, heck, why not give it a go? Um, but I couldn't create my self-insert in it, so I just went draw it, whatever. But I still didn't use that character at all. I just drew it. It's cool, fun, and then I moved on and did the same thing again. Um, Yeah, so that was how I treated doing self inserts most of the time. Oh, wrong keyboard. All right. I I would like to encourage you, first of all, for me, so that I can take a breath, drink some water, recover. But I would encourage that um, I have a little exercise for you that I will give you around about a minute just to have a think about it. For those of you who are in the chat available to type, you're very welcome to type there. If not, that's fine too. If you're listening or re listening to this later, just do it in your head or maybe on a piece of paper that you have around you. And the exercise that I'd like you to do is to think of 3 traits about yourself that you are proud of, or traits that you would like to embody, and try to summarize them. So, like I said before, for example, I would like to be a wise person. I'd like to be a teaching type of individual um, at some point in time in my life. So, I suppose wisdom is one way to put it. Or I like to also picture myself as an old granny someday, still drawing really cool things. So I would summarize that as creative longevity. I would encourage that you stick more towards personality traits rather than, I wished I could fly, because we can interpret personality traits later on. Just at the moment, try to think of traits that are achievable for you as a human being. So, are you all ready? Here is 1 minute going now. 15 seconds left to go. 5 seconds. And we're good. All right. So, moving on. The second part that makes a self insert is experience exploration. Kids do this wonderful thing called pretend play. And when they do, they pretend to be people that they won't be for probably the next 10, if not 20 years, or ever. They can be the teacher who never gives out M&Ms to anybody ever. They can be the pregnant mother. They can be um, the fireman who can save kittens from trees by walking up the tree without using any tools. From levels of ridiculousness. And this exercise that they do is very important for many different reasons because they learn how to interact with other kids, they learn how to play these roles and, you know, build empathy. And what they do is that they learn something called theory of mind, which is to realize that every person around them has different thoughts than they do. So, um, and that is a very important thing to realize because then you have to learn to communicate yourself effectively. So I did this exact same thing as a kid. Um, before I rediscovered tabletop role play a few years ago, by the way, it's amazing. You should do it. I did play some pretend play again as an 12-year-old with my friend. And what we did is we played basically Star Wars and we made ourselves commanders of this different army and we came up entire stories about Star Wars. Now, I don't know if I drew this picture or if he drew this picture, if we collaborated on this picture, and I don't even think it's a self insert, but it's one of the drawings that we did together. And I think it's one of the only times when I really did do self-insert storytelling to quite as intensive a degree at that point in time. Um, it's pretty amazing that we are able to um, role play things or read things or watch things and still build empathy about those situations without actually experiencing those events. Um, and there was a study that I recently read about where, they tried to see if people's brains responded a particular way to reading stuff or watching things. And when they were watching a film about this guy picking up objects or interacting in a certain way, the same cells that in your brain that usually light up when you pick up an object, they lit up for the people watching the show. So, scientifically speaking, I wish I could give you more facts, but I couldn't quite dig into it as much. But empathy really does come into play when you take part, even in pretend situations where you don't think where something isn't actually real, but you pretend that it is. Another one of the criticisms that I see surrounding, self inserts is um, that I've already forgotten. I have my notes, but it's all a little bit back to front by this point. Let's go to the next slide. More self inserts. Um, I learned eventually that self inserts can turn into characters because, we are experiencing these different. Um, in, that's what it was. In experience exploration, what we do, the other reason why we put our features into self inserts is that we want to explore them and understand them better. And for me, what this meant for me is that, I created the self insert on the left hand side to interact with my friend's Pathfinder characters. This sylph, she doesn't really look like me technically, but she was meant to be a self insert. And then, like I mentioned last time, I tend to put features into characters rather than into myself. So, what naturally happens is that this self insert eventually became a character, and her name is Jude, and she's totally different to me, except that we both share an enthusiasm for books and stories. But otherwise, she is much more extroverted and all of those things. And I actually found that the more I started to really enjoy my own characters when I started to put bits of myself into each of them. Not not so much that they're self-inserts anymore, but there is always a bit of the author in what they create. Corme on the left, she is an exploration of workaholic tendencies. Silas in the middle, he is a reflection of um, avoidance or trying to find a place where you can live forever in peace and without concerns about the world, in comfort, that sort of mind frame. And then Ludmila on the very right, they need my guidance, not my fears. She is a reflection on what I find quite difficult sometimes is, when you're helping people, do you feeling like you're above them when you're helping them, like it is your job to be the pillar of strength and always be above their issues and helping down rather than helping across or helping up. So she's sort of she takes that flaw that I have and then I extrapolate on it with her. So again, just a 1 minute break for me so that I can continue going. Is I'd like you to think now of free traits about yourself that you might be self conscious about or would like to understand better. Now, again, you're welcome to type into the YouTube chat, but I know that this is a little bit more sensitive, so you're welcome to generalize as much as you want, or you don't even need to put anything into the chat. So, once more, and again, these should be personality traits or things that you might have noticed that you struggle with, or even just subjects that you notice in others that you can't react to properly and you don't understand why you don't like those things. So, about to be ready in 3, 2, 1 minute starts now. 20 seconds going down. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, thank you. I hope these exercises are interesting to you. We will be using these as we go along. So try to keep your free traits wherever you make them. All right. The third thing that makes up a self insert is selection of traits. And we're kind of already starting to do that. So here's a little bit of psychology for you. Carl Jung, during the early 20th century, was a psychologist who developed analytical psychology, roughly at the same time as Freud developed his theories. I'm not going to go into all aspects of analytical psychology, but what Jung basically did was he tried to split the personality up into lots of different conscious and subconscious aspects that make up our entire personality. And it's actually a psychology theory very well suited for people to analyze where they are in life and where they would like to go, what features they would like to embody in the future. What is it that they value, what is it that they hide and that they want to process better. This is everything that self inserts do, by the way. Wink, wink, cuff, cuff. And one of the aspects that make up the personality is the persona, which means mask. This is why I wanted to split self inserts and personas. A persona is something that we use on a daily basis. We create different not visual, we create different ways of interacting with the people around us. And, we act differently towards our family, we act differently towards our friends, at work. All of these are personas. And one of the other criticisms that I've run into um, when it comes to self-inserts is that they are dishonest representations of the artist, and that they are explicitly made to mislead people, which isn't doesn't make sense, because then if our self-insert, our creative persona is a lie, then that means our everyday interactions with people are also a lie. A malicious lie, not just pretending, not just the subtle case, but a malicious lie. And that's not true, because without personas, if somebody didn't have a persona, refuses to have them, just to be completely honest about their whole personality all the time, first of all, they would make themselves very vulnerable to people who would try to take advantage of that. And second of all, we've all run into the people who say that they're brutally honest when they're just being, contextually insensitive. When somebody, during a what's it called? During a funeral, or if somebody's in depression, you don't nag them about inconsequential things like, "You've always been a messy person." Even if it's true, he shouldn't have said it, or she shouldn't have said it, or they shouldn't have said it, right? That whole meme comes to mind. But what can happen, and this is a legitimate fear, maybe that's partly why there's criticism towards self-inserts. Perhaps the fear is that people sometimes take their self-inserts and maybe try to embody them a little too much. And this is something that can happen with personas in everyday life. Teenagers, young people do this the most. All of those stereotypes that we hear about high schools, the jock, the nerd, the goth, the quote unquote gangster, the you know, all of these different stereotypes, partly they're due they're due there because of society and cultural influences, but they're also there because as teens we try to fit in. And we create sometimes personas that, again, like a self-insert, you pick your best features and you present that to the world because you want to make a good impression. You want to fit in. You want to create social harmony. That's what personas are for. But when somebody is lacking in confidence and self-confidence, when they're lacking in the love with for themselves on their own, what they do is that they rely very heavily on very specific traits that they've selected for their persona. Like with the goth, wears black dresses, listens to only one style of music, speaks in a very particular way, is I don't, I'm not that familiar, but these are all stereotypes, but people can rely on those. And that can be a problem. I am actually an example of it, because not so much because, I am a goth, yada, yada, but because I was so worried about being as humble as possible, I ended up, um, that's what I tried. And instead of, exploring that concept in self-inserts in a safe way, I tried to present myself as honestly as possible in drawings. And then instead, my persona in real life was, I am the goody two-shoes who never does anything wrong, is nice to everybody, and doesn't get angry, and etc. The list goes on. So, this is kind of cute what I've got on screen. It's one of the only times when I kind of deviated from my self portrait, this semi persona, but not too much, just the ears and the nose and the tail, and that's it. But I love the long eyelashes. They're like, I could kill people with that. Look at them, they're stabby long. They're great. And over time I tried to be as honest in my representation as possible. Eventually I did do some funky things. Those drawings on the right hand side are after a dentist appointment where the dentist did a really good job of cleaning my teeth, and it looks great, but it felt really uncomfortable. And I love these cartoons. They're so ridiculous and wonderfully silly. It was the first sort of deviation of how I would represent myself. And then a few years ago, I started to draw myself like a self-insert, more positively, exaggerate how I view myself and, draw clothes on myself that I don't own yet, like with the overalls on the third one. But I have overalls now, which look fantastic. I love them. And when I finally started to explore myself in self-inserts, in being a little bit more flexible with how I represent myself, I started to realize that the persona that I had every day, it started to break down. I didn't need to be the nicest, I mean, it's important to be nice, but what I mean is this constant state of being without fault in everyday life, which, you can imagine put too much pressure on my head. I was trying so hard not to turn into a narcissist, which is, it sounded like this disease that if I caught it, I could never get rid of it. It's another argument with self-insert. It turns people into narcissists. That's not true. It's personas. When you're desperate enough to fit in, you cling onto your personas, and that can make you look like you're trying to show off. And when that fell apart, I saw photos of myself after I saw some friends, and we had a great time. I loved it. And I saw these photos of myself afterwards, and I had this disconnection because finally in my drawings I had this dissonance of, having positive thoughts about myself and not being stuck to this perfect persona. But then and I think I recognized myself for the first time. Rather, I it was the me that I was supposed to be, I guess. So then I went through a period where I drew myself really ugly. And I look at these drawings now and I just laugh because they look funny, they're just silly things. But they didn't come from a silly place. And, it's a real shame that it took me that long to realize that, um, you know, th- this is where I learned the kind of proper meaning of humbleness. It's to be aware that you are in presence with other people and that you exist. But that doesn't mean that you don't exist. It doesn't mean that you have to hide yourself in order to fit in. So another exercise, this one is a little bit longer, or a little bit more complicated. So you might not be able to do it in the time frame that I give you, but I would start suggesting, if you've just popped in, we did 3 traits at the beginning that you really wanted to embody, and we did 3 traits of what you kind of would like to work on, and now try to combine them into choose out of those 6 free traits and create a persona. Give them a name. How do they behave differently? What do they look like? You can this is the point where you can say, this personality symbolizes I can fly. So in my case, the whole concept of, um, I can't think of an example, sorry. uh, but yeah, have a little bit of fun with that. Mix and match. How about this as an example? Remember that Sonic character at the start, the whole flying thing? I know that flying for me means creative freedom or freedom of character, but it also means a level of cowardice that I can fly away from problem at any point in time. So it has 2 meanings at the same time. But first of all, just choose 3 out of the 6. You can mix it up, match it however you'd like. So the 1 minute again starts now. By the way, I like some of the traits that have popped up in the chat. I also get a little bit scared of being seen as childish or naive or being too stubborn with what I want to achieve. That's been a struggle. All right, 15 seconds on the clock. Remember, you can think about this at a later point too. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. The last element that represents a self insert is the community presence. And this is the biggest subject, I think, to come out of this. But first, if all the self inserts I've shown so far haven't already calmed you down knowing that self inserts are okay, here is another argument for you. Self inserts have existed for much, 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 much longer than the invention of fan fiction. Here is a painting by Sandro Botticelli called The Adoration of the Magi. Magi. Yes, magi, that's the proper word. And, it is a very well-crafted painting, but he's been sneaky and he's added himself into it as well. Can you spot him? Can you work out where he is? Where is he? Where is he? He's over here. Sup. And, Botticelli was not the first person to do this, nor the last, but he's one of the examples. There's an artist called Raphael, who was a naughty boy and didn't even wait the 70 years after this painting, which was made in 1475. In 1509, he broke the copyright law and did the same thing. He hid himself in his painting. But he was, he's redeemable because he also hid in here two of his contemporaries. Where are they? Can you spot them? They're right smack bang in the middle. Leonardo da Vinci on the top of the stairs and Michelangelo at the bottom of the stairs. And he put himself, the artist Raphael, right in the corner, right-hand corner. Again, how dare you copy ideas, but Raphael. What's up? And then, another example is, one moment, I don't want to say the wrong name. Michelangelo, there we go, one of Raphael's contemporaries, made this very small painting. It's tiny. It only fills up a room about 10 meters tall. And he was a little bit more creative with doing a self-portrait in the painting. He decided to interpret himself like a persona, symbolically, like a brand. And the symbol that he chose for himself is right here, and it's flayed skin. I think a lot of artists and creative people feel like flayed skin most of the time, so I can understand his sentiments. So the reason why I wanted to share this with you, especially Raphael's painting, I know that they're mostly European examples. There are plenty more, but those are the first that popped into my head, is that, sorry, give me a second. The fun thing about self-inserts, which separates it from a regular persona, because a self-insert, by now you might realize, is an imaginary version of a persona. What they have in common is that they build community. You put on a persona to fit into the community. A self-insert does the same thing, just in a different space. What is really interesting, what happens as an artist, is that you no longer just exist in a social space. You exist in a fictional space at the same time. And we especially see this happen now in the internet age, where things like fan fiction, things like fandoms, and things like artistic competitions really live. I took part a few years ago in a competition based on DeviantArt called Artists at the Ready. And Artists at the Ready is an original character tournament. What that means is that you have a lot of comic artists in this competition. Two of them at a time go up against each other, using each other's characters to create separate stories. At the end of the round, the judges pick between the two stories which one is the one with better storytelling, and that person goes to the next round and goes up against the next artist until at the end you have one artist left. But what was interesting about Artist at the Ready and other OCTs as well, there was another one called The Other Side, was that not only could you insert your characters into the story, you could insert yourself. It was actually required that you, the artist, wrote yourself into the story together with your characters. And this prompt was fantastic. I loved it. I took part in it. I got to do the first round. I didn't didn't get much further than that. But my best friend who lives in Finland, she was my opponent and she won against me, and we're best friends now. What a testament uh to the whole process. And I still struggled with putting myself into this, because this is the first time, was before I had that realization how important self inserts are in exploring yourself. I still showed myself as a honest representation, and so I had trouble connecting with other artists and interacting in the imaginative space because I was too closely connected to my self insert. And that's the thing with self inserts, which is very interesting. Usually, a persona I like to describe as like a transparent but very thick mask. Even though somebody has a persona, you can still literally see their face, and you should know that there is more to the person than what the persona gives. It's flexible, right? Things can change. And it's a thick mask because it protects the entirety of our personality from what I've said before, being taken advantage of by, you know, nasty people, because some people don't have those barriers with their personas or lack thereof. But a self insert, I like to describe more like an opaque, papery mask. It's opaque, firstly, because on the internet, we don't see the person's face. We don't see what they're really like in real life. And so their self insert is the only real measurement of who they are. And it's papery because um, for artists, our creative endeavors represent us in ways that no real life persona can. We go into topics and symbolisms and visual aesthetics and tastes that can only be communicated through written stories or through visual drawings. And so we do actually get very attached to those self inserts. And one thing that I noticed, I'm just going to go to the next slide. You can just look at this however you please. What I've noticed in general when taking part in this competition with Artists at the Ready, but this is also common in fandoms where self inserts are encouraged. It also happens in role playing, multiplayer online role playing games where people play a self insert essentially against each other or with each other, and it's a representation of the person. And what I've seen happening is because there is that anonymous layer to the internet. We know from, again, many studies that anonymity can make people less nice. It can make them cruel. It can make them cold. And this is, sometimes it's malicious, but sometimes it really is just simply there is a lack of empathy. There is an inability to empathize through the screen. So with all of what I've just mentioned, if you can now imagine the problems, the potential problems that I've mentioned before, how there can be the breaking of a context, that uncanny valley. In this case, it's even more complicated because each artist has their own established context in their head, and the other artist might not know what that context is. So if people aren't communicating clearly, aren't doing the theory of mind exercise, they can start butting into each other's contexts in uncomfortable ways, and it's very difficult to explain why it's uncomfortable. Then the other issue of, people who get too attached to their personas, in this case, self-inserts, trying to represent themselves, they do start to come off as quote unquote narcissistic because they really want to try and fit in, but everybody else is doing the exact same thing. And I don't think I can really explain exactly how all these little bits and pieces interact because it layers and layers and layers and layers in a very complicated fashion. But that does not mean that it's the anonymity is bad, like awfully bad. Although, before I do continue, I do have an example from my own experience where I love Bionicle, by the way. I did do self-inserts of myself for Bionicle. The left one was an earlier one, says 2011 maybe, I'm not sure, and the other one I did more recently. Again, it looks like my dragon because I like consistency across my branding. And I used this self-insert in one role play with a person that I knew. And because, again, that papery mask, and I was being too honest with my self-inserts, which means that they were even closer to me than they should have been, meant that it just meant that when the interactions happened with a non-self-insert character, it got a little bit awkward when things got personal. And I just decided, you know what? I don't think I should be role-playing. So, yes. Anyway, I do believe I am running out of time, so I will need to do a little bit of skipping. The last exercise, which you can do when you head out, because I don't think it'll work in the chat so well anyway, is take your invented personas, maybe get somebody else to watch this this video, and start to play your persona. And you don't have to role play. You can just have that, my persona thinks such and such of other personas trait because. And, try your best to play the persona to the letter and not try to sneak in any more details about yourself. So overall, what I wanted to say in the end is that it doesn't mean it's a bad thing that the anonymity happens, because like I said, my best friend from Finland, I met through AATR. We didn't even talk for a while. We texted each other, and text is a powerful way to tell people things that you might be afraid to tell them in person, because eyesight and faces are intimidating to respond to. And self-inserts have that same function. They communicate things we could never do face. This is my newest self-insert, and she is from last October during Halloween, skeleton persona, why the heck not? First character that I've created, self-insert that I've created. That is supposed to be just for fun. I don't quite know yet what features she will have that are specific traits that I have, but exaggerated. But I do know that they will be ridiculous, and I'm going to have a lot of fun dealing with her in the future. So here's some credits and references. Thank you to a bunch of people that I asked about what does self-insert mean to them. They have helped me refine my talk and make sure that what I was talking about actually made sense. Also, thanks to Alison Huang at the bottom, Drazillion, for looking over my talk before doing it right now. And just before I go into Q&A, I'm not sure how much time I have left. Probably not very much at all. So I might have to do Q&A through Twitter. So make sure to follow me there. But the next talk happening in about 50 minutes, I believe, is Hien's talk. And he creates these wonderful, vulnerable self representation comics. And I am sure he will have something really meaningful to say also about the subject of self representation. All right, let's give this Q&A a go. Yeah, I have about 5 minutes left. Put them in. I'll try to answer maybe one or two questions. Um, and if you have more, just send them through Twitter and I will go through them there. I do believe there's a slight delay, so I might not be able to do it after all, but we'll see. All right. I'm not seeing anything come in, so I'm going to assume that there are no questions for now. But like I said, do do come to Twitter and ask me if you do have any questions. I'd like to wrap up by saying self inserts are a wonderful tool for self exploration. And if you are devising anything for games, if you're doing a community, or even if you're just doing your own self inserts, if you're concerned about, all of those problems of, perceived narcissism and breaking context, just practice or encourage your audience, whichever way it may be. You can find ways to encourage the audience to learn that a persona is a separate thing to them, that they can mix and match it, that they can change it up, that and that self-exploration in a fictional place is a good way um, to practice that without applying it in real life, doing those mistakes in real life. The trade-off for vulnerability and humbleness is this: that you have a greater chance of being upset and being hurt, that papery mask breaking. But there's also a much greater chance of creating better connections. So, 12-year-old me says, thank you for listening. Till next time, and take care of yourselves. Thank you.